Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're finally here at the last speculation video for Thrones of Decay. We've covered the Nurgle faction, we've covered the possible Empire one, and now we're going to look towards the Dwarfs. A faction which is very much liked by the community but avoided for obvious reasons. They've had two reworks but they're still not in a very good place, and this is probably the best time to give them an update. Well, it's now or never, right? Now, before anything, I do want to say that I really do believe that the Dwarfs will get the most attention in this DLC, because, let's be honest, Nurgle's fine, they just need some rebalancing, obviously some new mechanics for a DLC Lord. The Empire does need a little bit of help, but no faction needs it more than the Dwarfs. You see, the Dwarfs do have a fairly good roster. I know it's not as varied as people want, but this is pretty much as close to the army book as we have. They could do with some variety though, and it's stuff that was mentioned in lore that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this video, but I think that the biggest issue for the Dwarfs is mechanics and stuff in campaign. You see, for example, the tech tree is way too large, it needs to be split up like the Chaos Dwarf one. Some mechanics need to be turned into something quite unique. Keep in mind that a lot of the mechanics that were introduced, like say for example the item building and stuff, that's really just taken from the Tomb Kings. And while yes, they do have some unique mechanics, they're not really too inspired. Let's be honest, the Dwarfs haven't really aged too well, but then again, a bunch of factions from Warhammer 1 haven't, a lot of others have, but that's because, you know, the Greenskins got updated with a really good DLC, the Beastmen and the Wood Elves also, so it's about time that the Dwarves got the attention that they deserve. In terms of legendary characters, both Lord and Hero, well, I can really only think of three. Joseph Bugman, Grim Berlickson, and Malachi McKayson. We'll talk about them each in their own individual slots in this video. Now, there are a lot of dwarf characters established in lore, don't get me wrong, but these ones are probably the most unique, and Games Workshop and Creative Assembly are probably looking towards unique characters, because unique characters would allow for unique mechanics, wouldn't it? Obviously, in a perfect world, we'd get as many mechanics as possible, but I really don't think that we'll have that unless Creative Assembly start exploring, you know, character packs, DLC centered solely around characters. But with that being said, let's start looking towards the possible legendary characters, with the first being Joseph Bugman, who I imagine could be a legendary lord. You see, Joseph Bugman is very unique in terms of dwarf characters, mostly because while he looks fairly average, his origins are very different. He didn't lead a Karak, he wasn't really a king. The thing is, he was a humble brewer. He had a brewery within the lands of the Empire and lived a pretty humble life, selling his goods to other dwarfs, Imperials, and pretty much anyone with coin. Now, the problem is that orcs exist in this universe, and they decided to destroy his brewery. This was all happening whilst Bugman was away on a delivery. When he returned and he found the brewery destroyed and realized it was the Greenskins that caused it, he pretty much lost the plot. He's decided to set the biggest of grudges against the Greenskins and won't be happy until all of them are wiped out from existence. He leads his forces traveling across the known world, basically just hunting down any Greenskins that might emerge. And it's a pretty fun story if you haven't read through it. If he does end up as a character, we will have a lore video on that. Obviously, it's important to note that the goblins were the ones that destroyed his brewery, but his vengeance goes against everything. Orcs, goblins, hobgoblins, pretty much anything that can be considered a greenskin. And what would be pretty interesting about this character is, since he doesn't have a home and he's constantly traveling, he could be a horde. Yeah, I know horde factions don't really play too well, but this might be the time to get it done right. Building up little forward camps in your allies' bases, be it Dwarf, Empire, or pretty much any Order faction, in a very similar way as to how you could build up undercities in pretty much anyone's camps, but this would be only able to be built up through your allies' camps, and you could recruit armies there should you so wish. The main thing is that you'd be traveling, so you'd still have the horde system. It'd be a really strange take on the pseudo-horde, because essentially, yes, you're building up an empire, but it's built up in your allies' territories, and I think something like that would be really cool. Bugman is himself one of the biggest names in the Warhammer Fantasy franchise, so much so that, well, Bugman's beer actually exists in our real world, and Bugman's bar too at Warhammer World. And not only that, but even in Age of Sigmar, they brought back one of his descendants, and the fan base was basically saying, we don't want him, we want Bugman proper. I think that this is a strong contender for the dwarfs, as he could literally start anywhere. The only problem is, can Creative Assembly get horde mechanics right and make them enjoyable? The issue is that a lot of hordes aren't really fun. The beastmen are, but that's because, well, it took a while for the beastmen to get fun. And even then, we do have a horde faction with Nakai the Wanderer, and he's not very enjoyable to play. I guess time will tell. Maybe he'll be released as a white dwarf character instead, but again, it's all a matter of time. Next, we're going to look towards Grim Berlickson. This guy was a hero choice in tabletop, but heroes have been made into lord choices before, and I can imagine that this character could be either a lord or a hero in Total War Warhammer 3, as he's a master engineer, and we know that there's a hint about the legendary hero going into the toolbox and so on, so it could literally be this. What sets him apart is he's very young for a dwarf, especially as a dwarf engineer, master engineer, as he seems to be very proficient at what he does. He's able to work at lightning speed, essentially. Is very different to normal dwarfs, as rather than heeding advice from the other members of the guild and so on, he is so focused on trial and error, seeing how he can make things better. He's very different, and this is the thing, a young upstart is usually something which kind of sets you apart, right? As you can tell by the model which is on screen, he is very technologically advanced. It's basically what inspired the Caradon Overlords in Age of Sigmar, and he's known for his Grudge Raker, which is his ranged weapon. It's pretty much a shotgun, and the Cog Axe too, which does quite a decent amount of damage. As a legendary lord, this character could start literally anywhere once again, as, well, he's not really tied to a Karak, and it could work in such an interesting way, you know, going to different locations to try and find new ores or specific ores and gems to further his inventions. As a hero, he could literally just be a very strong master engineer, which could allow him to boost up your range weapons, your artillery pieces, all that different type of stuff. The character himself doesn't really have a lot of lore, unfortunately, but this would be the perfect time to introduce something new in terms of the story for the DLC. But that would obviously have to be up to Games Workshop, and then obviously pass writing checks with Creative Assembly. I don't know, he's super cool, and that's the main thing. One of the coolest models that have come out for the dwarfs in a long time. 8th edition was really kind to the dwarfs, in all honesty. It'd be a shame if we never actually got this character in one way, shape or form. Next is Malachi McKayson, which I really think this character will be a legendary hero, though it is very likely this character could be a legendary lord too for a number of reasons. So, who is Malachi? He is a Dwarf Slayer engineer. Very few of them exist in lore as far as I'm aware, with Malachi being the most famous. He was a character who worked on a lot of gunships, for example, the Undestructible, which as you can imagine went boom. And because of that, and many people dying because of the explosion, Malachi took the Slayer Oath. Before that, he was just known as a rather strange, gifted engineer. Now, he's very strange compared to most Slayers because he keeps working on his inventions. We know of, obviously, the Spirit of Grungi, which is one of his more successful creations. This was a Dwarf Thunder Barge, which many people are hoping for, essentially. The Goblin Hero is also his. We know that he fights with a lot of range weapons too, which is kind of unknown when it comes to Slayers. Most of them want to be in close combat as much as possible. But I mean, he's cool, right? He's very, very cool. He's actually been featured in a lot of Gotrek and Felix books. He was featured in the Storm of Chaos campaign too. There's just so much about this character. We could be here for hours and hours. Now, because he is a disgraced engineer, most people see him as a possible hero. However, he could be a lord, as he does have a lot of people working with him. The fact also is that he was known to work in the Null Gunnery School too as a teacher and engineer, which kind of links up to the possible DLC. We kind of are expecting Tamakon versus Elsef. What better than a dwarf that is a teacher at the school where the main battle happens? And to be honest, the more I think about it, considering that a bunch of units that we're going to talk about in this video are linked up to him, it's very possible that he might be the lord and maybe Grim Berlickson would be the hero. Either way, I'll be happy because it's two characters that I'm really hoping for. And if it's one or the other, and then obviously Joseph Bugman, I'll be happy too. As you can imagine, I want more dwarf characters, I want new start positions, and most importantly, I want the dwarfs to be fun. So we're going to jump into the generic stuff for every roster, and before anything, I want to talk about a man option, Shieldbearers. Yes, I know it's not the most exciting thing when you look at it, it's just literally two dwarfs holding up the character, but this was actually quite a well-loved thing back in the tabletop, because it was a way to turn your character into a 1+ armor save killing machine. We have throne bearers, obviously, with VIKRAM, but it's about time that we started getting Shieldbearers. It's just something that really needs to be done, let's be honest here. I guess we can call this a man option, yeah, but it's iconic, right? And it's something that would allow for an even tankier Dwarf Lord, and they're tanky as they are, but you know, a lot more, and it's just cool. And cool factor is a big thing. A generic Lord and Hero Slayer character would be awesome, just in case people want to have Slayer armies. If we do get Malachi, then obviously it would make sense, but it also would help Ungrim too, because yes, you know? It's just kind of weird that you have a Slayer faction and there's no actual Slayer Lord and Heroes, which is a bit disappointing because theming is a big thing, and there are a lot of people who like to play Total War Warhammer in a themed way. I know, yes, there are mods for that, but it's something that people want officially, and yeah, you know, that would be kind of cool. So yeah, hopefully we get to see this, if not this DLC, maybe another one in the future. You never know if they might need a 4th rework for the dwarfs. I really hope not. Alright, so now we're going to start looking to more unique units. The first thing we're going to look at is the Goblin Hero. I mean, look at this piece of machinery. It's absolutely awesome. I have this model, and I am so much in love with it because it just looks super, super cool. So the Goblin Hero itself is a war machine, as you can tell. Very good at melee combat. Some of them could even have a little bit of range, you know, throwing some axes could work. Maybe that is done as a Regiment of Renown. But it's a war machine which would be durable, it'll be able to do decent amount of damage, and cut through infantry and likely armored infantry without too much of an issue. The Goblin Hero was attached to Malachi back in the day through the Storm of Chaos, but I could imagine that it could be turned into its own unit, and it's definitely something which many people do want. It's also something which would easily add in a little bit of difference to the dwarfs, as they don't really have too many war machines right now. Well, they have no war machines barring artillery, and this could be the best way to get things started. Now, we can't talk about the dwarfs without talking about the Thunder Barge, that's very certain. You see, the Thunder Barge never really had a model, but it did have rules in the Big Red Book for 8th edition, and what it is an immensely powerful airship. This is something that's going to have a lot of weaponry, do a lot of damage. It's a very impressive piece. If you wanted one on the tabletop, you had to build one yourself, which was a fun thing. I know loads of people used to do that, but it's something that I never did myself because, well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, lazy. But yeah, this is something that definitely could be added in. It's a big Forge World-like unit. Every faction generally has one. It would be cool to see something just really devastating. I don't imagine that there'd be many of them in the battlefield. It would kind of work maybe like Dreadsaurians, where they would be limited and you have to build certain buildings to be able to get them, but it's definitely something cool, and cool factor is a big thing. Once again, I mean, we've seen them depicted in like Return of Reckoning, sorry, Age of Reckoning. Return of Reckoning is the private server. They were mentioned since 4th edition, I want to say, and obviously the rules were in 8th. I would really love this. We know a few in lore, right? The War of Thunder, Spirit of Grungi, and then obviously Indestructible, which, yeah. If we don't get this in this DLC, I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed, so I really hope Creative Assembly are listening to the fan base, because, yeah. Okay, let's move on to something a little bit different. These are the Slayer Pirates, which would be Slayers with handguns. So they're a skirmish unit. They'll be able to fire a little bit and then get into combat, or fire as they get into combat. I know it's not the most unique unit for people, but, you know, Long Drong is a big character in terms of lore. I don't imagine him being introduced, but I would imagine that if we have a little bit of a Slayer focus, then that would mean that we'd have a little bit of a range unit too, so the Slayers could have some sort of range before getting into close combat. They were also used during the whole Storm of Chaos campaign for the Slayer army, and I mean, they're kind of cool. Again, I know it's not the most impressive, but I like them. Karak-Kadrin is actually one of the factions that I do like the most about the dwarves, and kind of fits with the whole theme of the channel. If you haven't noticed, my logo does follow the suit of Karak-Kadrin. We're going to talk about Rune Golems and Rune Guardians together, as they're kind of the same thing, just different size. Essentially, dwarven-powered mechanisms with rune power. Big, strong. One of them is about the size of an ogre. We know that the other is usually much, much larger. Artwork did exist to them, but just never turned into tabletop miniatures. And it would be kind of cool to have some automatons. Obviously, having something fairly durable, but also large, that could probably move at a decent pace and deal a decent amount of damage would be helpful. Ogre-size automatons would be quite cool. It very much depends. Honestly, I'd say that it just really falls on, if we get one, we might not get the other. I would prefer the ogre-size one, not the giant-size one, because the bigger that they are, the more close targets they are, and they'll just get shot down. But some people might prefer the other. Hey, in a perfect world, we'd get both, but I'm trying to be realistic in seeing how many units we could get, and it would be cool if we just had a lot, really, just finish off the dwarfs now, but then that would really mean that we'd need character packs to introduce new dwarf characters. And the last unit I'd like to see myself would be the Doomseekers, because I really, really liked these in the Storm of Chaos campaign. They're slayers, but they are extremely destructive. Basically using axes as flails, which is super, super cool. The idea is they're supposed to cut through infantry without too much of a problem, which, yes, I know the Goblin Hero would do too, but who doesn't want unique slayers, right? If we're going to get the Slayer Pirates, hopefully, then it would be great if we had these too, as honestly, I just want more. Slayer units have always been absolutely awesome. They were paint to paint back in the day because they were all metal, and orange is very difficult to use. But in Total War, we don't have to paint them, so we could just use them and have some fun here. These would obviously be great for not only charging into your enemy's front, but also the side and the rear too. Probably having some sort of very similar thing as Devastating Flanker, mostly because it does make sense if you're being attacked by a bunch of whirling blades. I mean, yeah, you would start losing morale quite heavily. And I'd love to see just how Creative Assembly could turn these units from, you know, a metal model into something into Total War Warhammer. It's definitely one of my most wished for units. So there's one more to talk about. This is one that I'm mentioning because I know if I don't, people are going to get mad. So the Shard Dragon is something which is independent. It's a creature. We don't know if it's a full dragon or if it's just the name Shard Dragon, but it's something that a lot of people are linked to the dwarves, mostly because they've got similar stubbornness, ferocity, and all that type of stuff. The issue is that they're not linked to the dwarves. Dwarves and Shard Dragons have actually been into quite a lot of fights due to the fact that the deep caves that have Gromril usually have Shard Dragons, and yes, if you hear some thunder, it's because there's a random thunderstorm happening right now. Some dwarves have been able to subdue them due to runic collars, but even then, I don't know if this could work out. It just seems like it's very odd for a Skaven army. Hell, if Creative Assembly can think of an interesting way to introduce them, I'd love to be proven wrong, but yeah. Plus, I don't think they actually had a model. This was a big issue with Games Workshop back in the day, where rules would be introduced, but no model. Sometimes artwork, and the Shard Dragon does have art, but yeah, it's one of these things where that's why that whole Chapter House lawsuit happened. Ultimately, the main thing is that the dwarves need attention, and hopefully this DLC will bring that. I have faith in Creative Assembly. Again, I wouldn't think that they'd do 3 different races in a Lord pack if they didn't think that they could do it. These are honestly my picks. I could be wrong, but I feel like these would be cool additions to the dwarves to add in a little bit of flavor here and there. I mean, the Thunder Barge alone will make people buy the DLC, but a Goblin Hero added to that would be cool. Some extra Slayer variants. I would be happy with just the Shieldbreakers. Obviously, they need more than that, just that. But shield breakers for me are a big thing. But what would you like to see in Thrones of Decay? Is there anything from this list that you want to see? Is there anything that I might have missed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. Apologies if this video does go late, by the way, because the thunderstorm is making it very difficult to actually record, so we'll see how it goes. But again, have a nice day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.